Hi, this is how you replace the power supply of a PlayStation 5 if the power supply has stopped working or if it needs to be replaced for any other reason. This exact PlayStation 5 model is a CFI 1116A, being the standard disc model. The procedure for doing this is relatively similar on the digital edition as well, however the Slim and Pro versions have a somewhat different layout. There are also version differences in the internal layout between the different standard PS5 models, so be aware of any differences if you are using another version. Using the model number on the back of your console along with some googling, you should be able to decipher which power supply version your specific console is using. However, to be completely sure, I would probably recommend opening the console up and looking at the actual model name of the power supply. That is at least what I did here before I brought this one off of eBay, which is now the exact same power supply that is inside the console as well. Also, before we start, opening up your PS5 and replacing internal components will void all your warranty. So if you got any warranty, use that instead. Also, be aware that there is always a risk of damaging components, cords or cables when doing this, so following these instructions or using them for reference is at your own risk. I am in no way an expert at this, but mostly a happy amateur, so please be aware of that. Alright, first, to get into the console, we are going to need a normal Phillips screwdriver as well as a Torx T8 security one, basically a normal Torx T8 with a little hole in the middle. Then we begin by removing both sides of the console by lifting and pushing them downwards from the upper back corner on the respective sides. We then unclip the little air thingy intake on the side, starting from the middle and then going out towards the sides. After this, we're going to get out the fan. This is done by first removing the little protective strip covering the plug, after which we then use the Torx screwdriver to remove all of the fan screws. A tip here is to keep the screws still attached to the fan and fan grill so you don't forget where they go. Then we just unplug the fan and lift the whole thing out of the console. Next, we're going to unscrew all the visible screws along the sides of the console. Here I highly recommend just loosening them completely and then letting them stay in the respective hole so you don't have to worry about which one goes where. Here we also carefully disconnect the little cable up the top for the optical drive to get it out of the way before proceeding. Also, don't forget to unscrew the Phillips screw holding the SSD expansion lid in place like I did. Then everything should come apart. Here though, be extremely careful to not break the flat ribbon cable connecting the disk drive to the motherboard. This needs to be disconnected to get both halves of the console separated. To get this plug out, just slightly push down on the metal part of the connector and then nudge the cable out from the other side. Next, we're going to disconnect these three plugs up to the left that all just snaps out. And then this one down the bottom of the board. We then unthread the antenna cables going alongside of the console and then letting them be free for a while, after we then set out to unscrew the 5,000 million screws holding this thing together. All these screws, except for this one, are of the exact same length and diameter, so they can be kept together. Also make sure here to either refer back to this part of the video when you're reassembling the console to know which holes should or should not have a screw in them at this point. If you got a different version of the console, take a picture here to note which holes have screws in them before proceeding. Once all the screws are out, we are not completely done here. Instead, we flip the console over and remove these two ones from the back as well. We then flip the console back and we should now be able to lift the metal part away from the motherboard. Next, we need to disconnect the front panel connector by again just pushing down on the back of it and then nudging the plug out from the other side. And after this, we can finally lift out the motherboard and get to our power supply. Funny enough though, this is not held in place by any screws at all at this point and can just be lifted straight out of the console. Before installing the newer power supply, we also need to remove the antenna cables from the old power supply and move them over to the new one. These are just slightly clipped onto the power supply and comes out without any prying whatsoever. Then we just attach them to the new power supply and nudge the whole thing back into the console, making sure here that it aligns up properly with the cutouts on the back of the console. And after this, it's basically just a reversal process of placing the motherboard on top of the power supply, making sure it connects to it and are sitting firmly in place. We'll then push back the front connector cable by holding down the little lever and nudging it back in. Then we attach the motherboard with a few screws, flip the console over and then attach the two back screws. We'll then flip everything back again and put the metal cooling piece on and screw in all the screws, making sure here to pick the correct holes, otherwise you won't be able to get the rest of the cover and the fan connector back on in the next step. In this step, we also thread and put back both the antenna cables and the two other smaller ribbon cables as well. Also here, before we put the two main pieces back together, we carefully reattach the disk drive cable by pushing down on one side of it and then inserting the cable on the other end of the little connector. Then we just rest the top cover back on the console and reattach all of the screws. Finally, the extra connector cable for the disk drive goes back again up the top, as well as the bracket screw for the SSD space, and then we reposition, connect and fasten the fan grill and the little protective piece for the cables. Lastly, both sides are snap-backed on and we are done. Well done. Hopefully your console now works as intended. Please though share any thoughts or questions down in the comments below and I'll do my best to answer them. Thank you for watching. Bye!